Hello friends, Gregg Braden here, and I want to welcome you to this edition of our questions and answers. Where do I even begin? There is so much happening in the world. There are so many questions from you to me about what's happening in the world. I'm going to do my very best to address those. I'm going to jump right in. But before I do, there's something else that I want to share with you. First, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you, my community, for all of your love, all of your support, in the way that you honor me through the comments and the questions that you send to me. I love you, my community, and I do feel that we're a global community working together to create the best world possible. And we have been successful as a community here on this YouTube channel. And because we are successful, there are people that are trying to take advantage of that success. They're trying to take advantage of me. They're trying to scam you. And I want to just address the issue of scamming. What I want you to know is I will absolutely never ask you to send me money from this YouTube channel. I will not ask you to send me your phone number for a personal conversation from or a WhatsApp from this YouTube channel. And anytime you see a comment on this channel, if it doesn't have a little blue check next to the comment, it is not an official comment from me. It's not me speaking to you. That little blue check is a certification that we earned. We, being my team, my staff, the people working behind the scenes to make this YouTube channel possible, we worked hard to earn that. And it is a mark of security to let you know when you are communicating with us officially. If you don't see that mark, someone else is trying to scam you. I want to talk to the scammers. If you're a scammer watching this today, my brother, my sister, I'm going to invite you to take the passion that you put into the scamming and direct that passion into the things that bring joy into your life. I know you've got something to say. I know you have feelings about the world, and no one can convey those better than you because they're your feelings. So I'm going to invite you to take that energy you put into trying to take advantage of someone else, direct that into the world in a really beautiful way, so that you can share your unique gifts with the world. Because ultimately, there's only one of us here. We are all connected. And when you take advantage of someone else, you're actually taking advantage of yourself. When you scam someone else, you're scamming yourselves. I want you to think about that. The content on this channel, when we began putting this channel together, I was advised by people that I respect to not put so much quality content on this channel for no charge, to not make so much information available for free. And my feeling is there are some things that just have to be said. Some things that we need to share openly, we need to share freely. Some of you have made comments to me that you feel my words are measured sometimes and that I am not fully revealing what I feel and what I know. That is partially true because there are places where we will be deplatformed if I share those things. And if I'm deplatformed, I'm no good to you and I'm no good to myself. So I believe that for now, there is a middle ground where I can say what I want to say. Sometimes, you read between the lines. But we still are connected and we still have the platform and the freedoms are changing. Excuse me, we're going through a revolution in this generation that we already went through in a previous generation. But this generation may not be aware of that. And it's all about freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to share ideas. So we're going through it again, and I'm learning to navigate those waters. So if you see me hesitate sometimes, yeah, I may be doing that to honor you, to honor myself, so we can stay connected and keep this YouTube channel up and running. The reason that I wanted to say a few words before we get into the Q&As. Of course, I want to talk about Ukraine and Russia and what's happening. There are no other words. There are no words for the horror. There are no words for the tragedy. There's no words for the suffering. There's no words for the deep, deep hurt that we're all witnessing real time now on social media and on live TV. It's unspeakable, it's unthinkable. I think one of the things that surprised me the most is how surprised many people are that this event has happened. I am getting correspondence from young people, and this is primarily from young people. And when I say young people, I mean those that were born approximately 1995 or later. So millennial-ish, give or take. I am surprised at how many of those young people are absolutely just astounded that what is happening in Eastern Europe is happening right now. And I'm seeing it on not just information coming to me, I'm seeing it on other YouTube channels and television stations that are run by these extraordinary young people that want to lead the world in sharing new information. And they are literally in tears. They're crying on the camera because they can't believe what they're seeing. I want to speak to you, to these young people. The reason you're surprised is because of the lack of continuity in history, the lack of continuity in information, the lack of continuity between generations that is so necessary for a healthy civilization. And I'm not saying that this is your fault. You are the product of institutions. You are the product of a way of thinking, and we all see this happening right now. There is an effort to rewrite the history of our civilization, to rewrite the history of our nations. There is an effort to create a narrative that supports an agenda that is driving us toward the world that is the product of the thinking of a handful of people. All right, and I'm not going to comment on that right now, but I'm making a point. When you rewrite the history, how can we learn the lessons from the suffering of our past? How can we prevent ourselves from making the mistakes again if we're not honest with ourselves about the history? And there are a lot of places in history that are absolutely horrible. They are frightening. They are staggeringly frightening. They're unthinkable. The Holocaust, for example, it is a fact. It did happen. It can't be denied. The evidence is overwhelming for what happened. And that Holocaust is not the only Holocaust. There are Holocausts happening today that are not being carried in the mainstream. They don't want to talk about it. It is not obviously on the same magnitude, but it is happening. And the reason that this information is not being shared is because there are a handful of people in positions of power that are trying to shift the story. We are the product of our story, the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. And this isn't just history. I mean, this is happening in science. You've heard me talk about this in science. Evolution is a perfect example. When I was in school back in 1950s, 60s, early 70s, well, actually, all the way up into the 80s and 90s through college and my corporate experience, the story that is being taught in public schools is that you and I are the product of random mutations and lucky biology, and that competition is the fundamental rule of nature, survival of the strongest. And I want to be clear, those are Darwin's exact words that were later rewritten and reinterpreted as survival of the fittest. I've got copies of his original manuscripts, survival of the strongest, and it's important because that reflects a way of thinking. So those ideas are still being shared in public classrooms today. Our young people are being indoctrinated into the thinking that we're the product of an accident, of random mutations of biology, when the science doesn't support it, the genetics doesn't support it. The new forensic DNA studies no longer support this. We know it's not true, and it's still being taught because there is a narrative of who we are that is being perpetuated. The same thing is happening in history. The history is being cherry-picked. And if you don't know about what happened early in the 20th century, mid-20th century, and the horrors of Europe at war, and the horrors of the thinking that one race is better than another, and the horrors of the way that the competition between the superpowers and the former superpowers played out. The former USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic, which is now Russia, the former United States, because we're not the same country anymore, so the former USA. What happened in the 20th century? Now, I don't want to rehash the history, but I'll say this. The Cold War was the longest undeclared war in American history, from 1947 until officially it ended in 1989. And the collapse of the former Soviet Union happened in 91 as a result of what happened in 1989. If you don't know that, and if you don't know that the world lived under the threat of nuclear annihilation during that time, if you don't know that at that time the Soviet Union had over 40,000 nuclear weapons in its arsenal, and the United States had little more than half of that. We had 23,000 nuclear weapons. You put those together and there is enough nuclear power in that combined arsenal to microwave this planet many times over. Total overkill. It is insane, absolutely insane, to spend one iota of energy, of intellect, of life force into building those kinds of arsenals, yet we did. And this is the world that we lived in until the end of the Cold War, when the two superpowers began to reduce those nuclear arsenals. And we still have nuclear arsenals today, nowhere near what we had before. They are approximately, I think, right around 14 to 1,500. Soviet Union, Russia has a little bit more than America right now. I think America's got around 1,400 nuclear weapons. Russia has a little bit more than that, maybe 1,500, something like that. Actually, I have a note, and I want to give you good numbers. All right, 1,456 for Russia, 1,354 for the United States is what we have, which is still more than we need to destroy civilization as we know it. But this is the world that you, young people, you are born into a world that rests upon the foundation of this history. And it's a frightening history, and it was a powerful, powerful time of learning. We learned a lot about ourselves. So if you don't know that, then what you're seeing happening in Eastern Europe looks mysterious to you, because it is part coming right out of the playbook from those Cold War days. The reason is because a lot of the power that is still in place, the governmental powers, are still in place. They're the same people that were playing a role during the Cold War years. The Cold War wasn't that long ago. So the point is that we need this continuity. We need to honor our history, and we need to honor our past, and we need to honor our generations. Young people, you've got a beautiful way of looking at the world in the future, and people from my generation and before my generation. We want that future as well, and it's being built within the context of a world that we're coming from. And there are ways to go about doing this to create the least suffering and to create the greatest opportunities for a smooth transition. We're changing. Can't stop the change. The question is, are we going to come in for a hard landing on this change, or can we come in for a gentle, a soft landing on this change? And I've seen this. I know that we can do it. We can work together to transition gracefully into, and not necessarily slowly. I think this transition is happening quickly, but we can transition into this new world without eliminating entire industries, without people losing jobs and creating the suffering, because there's a tendency to go to extremes. Politicians go to extremes, and social architects, they say, you know, this isn't going to work, so let's do this, and they want to go from here to here without having a transition, and that's where people get hurt. That's where the suffering comes from, and typically the people that are hurt the most are the ones that can least afford to be hurt. They're the ones living paycheck to paycheck. They have the least resilience. They don't have the buffer and the cushion socially, economically, to weather these abrupt changes that we're going through. There are ways to do this, smart ways, really smart ways to do this. Now I'm going to give you an example. What's happening right now in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and Russia, it is the product of four factors. It's money, power, ego, and habit. Money, power, ego, and habit. A lot of that has to do with natural resources. Ukraine is it's a big country. It is rich in agricultural resources, geological resources. As a geologist, I love to talk about these things. Rich in resources. If we had weaned ourselves from a fossil fuel based economy, I seriously doubt you would see happening what you're seeing happening in Eastern Europe right now, because the role of oil and gas is playing such a powerful role. Europe has very little fossil fuels and they're dependent upon fossil fuels. So those fossil fuels have to be imported. A lot of that import comes from Russia, some of it comes from Ukraine. So Europeans are walking this delicate line in terms of how they respond to a crisis, because they stand to lose the benefit of the vital resource of energy that they need. We have the technology, and I've talked about this in other programs. We have had the technology for 60 years to wean ourselves from fossil fuels. And I am not against oil. And I want to be really clear on this. Young people, you have been taught to demonize oil, or oil has been demonized uh, in your circles of thinking, and you've been told that it is this horrible thing. What I want to say about oil, it is such a rare and precious resource that is a finite resource. We don't know how long it will last, but it won't last forever. It is such a vital resource. We need to stop burning it because we need it for so many other things. I have a list. There are over 3,000 areas, 3,000 places in your life every day that would not work if you did not have fossil fuels. We wouldn't have this conversation, because this computer that I'm speaking on, your computer, the components of your computer, the technology that allows the transmission of energy, it wouldn't be possible without fossil fuels. In the healthcare industry, we wouldn't have the plastics and the rubbers that allow us to deliver life-saving fluids into the human body, and to do the kinds of processes that we do. Agriculture, I mean, you name it. We need oil, but not to burn. We need to stop burning it. And we've had the technology to do that. I did a program on this, and I'm going to put a link in the comment section below. So check out this link, because there's I think it's a 35-minute program that I did covering two issues. One, why solar energy and wind energy cannot possibly be the answer to the world's energy needs. I'm not going to rehash it here, but what I will say to you is, in the renewable energy sector, those renewable forms of energy go through three phases. There is the production phase, the utilization phase, and the post-utilization phase. When the solar panels are no longer working, what do we do with them? Well, what I want to say, the only one of those phases that's green is the utilization. When those solar panels are on the roof of your home or your business, and I use them as well, I love them. When they're there, however, that's the only time they're green. No moving parts, they're creating electricity, not as efficiently as they could be, but they are creating electricity. What it took to get those solar panels, nobody wants to talk about. It's the child labor of rare earth minerals that are very finite in nature, unregulated, concentrated in a handful of nations that don't think the way that we do, that can shut those minerals off coming to the rest of the world with the stroke of a computer key. They are toxic to produce. They are toxic in the solar panels, and when they go into the landfills and they begin to break, those toxins leak into agriculture, they leak into the groundwater. I talk about all that in the program. It wouldn't do any good to talk about that if we didn't have an alternative. We have had an alternative now since the 1960s, a form of energy, base load energy. What you want is a base load energy that works no matter what the temperature, regardless if there's wind or sun, or if it's 50 degrees below zero or 115 degrees above zero. That is always available. That's the base load you want to run the hospitals, to run the control towers at the airport, to run your home. We've had a form of energy that was discovered during the Manhattan Project in World War II that produces zero greenhouse gases. We've got that right now. Cannot be weaponized the way that uranium can be converted into plutonium for a nuclear weapon. You can't do that. It cannot melt down like a Fukushima reactor. The waste products can be recycled to become the fuel again. It is inexpensive. It is abundant in the Earth's crust. In most of the continents of the world, it is element number 90. It is called thorium. It is not theory. It's not experimental because we had thorium-based reactors up and running in the United States. We had them in 1980s. We had them between the 60s and the 80s. And I list them in the conversation that I'm referring you to in the link. But we've had them. They were decommissioned in the 1980s. The oil and gas lobby is so strong that the decision was made in the 80s to go with oil and gas. Natural gas, liquefied natural gas, it's 50% cleaner than coal, and it's 50% cleaner than some other forms of energy, so it's not bad. But why use that if it can be the source of political tensions and the suffering that leads to the wars that we're seeing right now? And it's not the only one. Most of what you're seeing happening in the Middle East, where the oil-rich belt in the Middle East, it's all over energy. Think what happens if you pull energy out of the equation. If everybody has the energy they need, zero greenhouse gases, can't be weaponized, can't melt down, and it's abundant, inexpensive, that removes from the equation the need for war to capture and to dominate these forms of energy. And that is a big part of what you're seeing. It's not the only thing. Remember, there was money, ego, habit, money, power, ego, and habit. Ego is human nature, and this is something that is up to the people in the countries that have leaders who are allowing their egos to overpower common sense and what's best for their nations. And this is something that we all have to step up and be aware of. So what I'm saying a lot of things here. What I'm saying is that the ability to focus war upon energy, in my opinion, it's something that we can remedy very quickly. This war is already in place. The only way out of it now is to go through it. I honestly don't know what the end game will be. I don't know how you back off of the hurt and the suffering and the damage that has been created. And it's going to be a challenge for the powers of the world and the powers that are involved to do this. I also believe it can be done. I believe it can be done peacefully. You know, there are a lot of prophecies right now from many different perspectives: Native American, indigenous, ancient, Gnostic, religious, biblical, that talk about great wars that will happen in our lifetimes. And they give the dates for those wars. And many people are asking me about those prophecies. I'm not going to address the question specifically because they're all asking the same thing. And the question is, do they have to come to fruition? When we talk about prophecies, what a prophecy is an individual using deep intuition to peer into the timeline of space and time into a future date. The key is that timeline is looking in a linear fashion. It's looking from this moment in time where we are right now, looking down the road of time or down the road of space-time to another possibility. What the prophecies rarely take into account is the bifurcation that is possible in space-time. And what I mean by that is if nothing changes between the moment of the prophecy and when that prophecy unfolds, if nothing changed between Nostradamus looking at the year 2500 and the year itself, if nothing changed, then what he saw is very possible. But we are beings of choice. Some people talk about free will, and the free will has a whole new meaning when we talk about quantum possibilities. So I'm going to talk about choice. We always have a choice. And even if it's not the best choice, a little choice can be enough to bifurcate and shift that timeline so that it goes into a new possibility, a new potential. And the prophecies talk to us about that. The Hopi prophecy. Some of you have asked about that, for example, um, on what's called Prophecy Rock on the Hopi Mesa, and I've written about this in some of my previous books. Show two parallel timelines. One timeline, the individuals, the humans, are bent over with a cane, indicating they live to old age. There are stalks of corn that are growing. And interestingly, the timeline continues to the edge of the rock face, and then it goes around the rock and it keeps going. It's a long timeline. There's another timeline that shows the people with their heads separate from their bodies. And with the Hopi elders that I've spoken with, what they say is it means people, they don't know themselves. They're not attached to their heads. It is a rough road. It's not a smooth road like the other one. There is no corn growing. People's heads are separate, and it ends abruptly. It's the road that goes nowhere. We are at a choice point where we are choosing which of those roads we're going to follow. From some perspectives, the belief is that we've already passed the choice point, yet we still always have choice. All right, there are some people that are interpreting this say that we passed the point of no return. I don't believe that, and I don't think the evidence supports that, although I think it's more difficult. Once the momentum grows following a choice, it could be more difficult to make that choice. Many of you have heard me talk about the biblical prophecies in the Bible code, or what is called the Torah codes. The mysterious codes, when you convert the letters into the gematria, into the numbers, and you run those through computer algorithms, there are intelligent messages encoded in the first 5 books of the Christian Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, which is the Torah in the Judeo-Christians, or the Judeo traditions. There are intelligent messages that are beyond chance. Statistically, these are not a fluke. Now, why they're there, there's a whole story around why they're there, who put them there, and what they're telling us. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because these codes, I mean, they're very accurate. I've seen when the queries are made for World War II, for example, what countries came into World War II, they're in the code. The year that they entered into the war, who the leaders of the nations were, how long the war lasted. Same with World War I, same with the assassination of President John Kennedy, same with the name of the assassin who killed him, and the name of Yitzhak Rabin and his assassination, in the street where he was assassinated, the time of day, and excuse me, it goes on and on and on. And people have dedicated their lifetimes to understanding how this mystery can be. The reason I'm sharing this with you now is because in those biblical codes, they never predict anything. You have to know what to enter to understand how it intersects the events of life. So they don't predict, yet there is a phenomenon. In every one of the most frightening indications, there's always, if it says nuclear holocaust or atomic holocaust or global pandemic or whatever it is, there are words close to that event that say, will you change it? Will you change it? And that's the point of what I'm saying. We have a choice even in those ancient texts. So I believe we do have a choice in terms of how the events in Eastern Europe are being resolved. There are many possibilities, and it's going to test the resolve, and it's going to test the spiritual nature of those who are involved in making those decisions. They're going to have to go beyond line items on a map. They're going to have to go beyond borders. We're going to have to go deeply into the essence of the human soul and say, what world are we choosing? And you and I are a part of that, because the field of information that those leaders and those decision makers are part of, it's the same field that you and I are a part of. When it comes to the field that connects all things, every CEO of every corporation, every dog, every cat, every blade of grass, every human, every leader of every nation is part of that. And what we choose in our daily lives feeds that field, either in a healthy way to create coherence, or in a way that creates more chaos that leads to the suffering and difficult decisions. So in a very real sense, you and I are part of what's happening. Now, I'm going to go just a little bit longer than I would typically go because I do want to answer one of the questions, and it ties into exactly what we are talking about right now. The question The question comes from Eileen, all right? And what Eileen is asking is in one of my previous books, I wrote that it takes a certain number of people to bring peace in a given population. And I gave a formula. The formula was the square root of 1% of a given population. If the square root of 1% of a given population creates coherence, creates calm and peace, then the community that they are in benefits from that. So I want to speak to that. That information was very common knowledge as a result of studies that were done by the TM organization, Transcendental Meditation Institution, or organization. It was done back in the 1970s. And what the studies showed very clearly was that in populations of 10,000 or more, when the TM meditators were placed in that population and they did the meditation that they were taught, that statistically the community benefited from that. So crimes against people declined, emergency hospital room visits declined, car accidents declined, violent crimes declined. The key is, when they stopped the meditation, those statistics reversed. And people said, well, what happened? I thought, I thought we just changed the consciousness, we changed the vibration. It's the same thinking when it comes to what's happening in the world right now and in Eastern Europe. Many people are saying, let's do a prayer, let's do a meditation to stop the violence, to stop the hurt. And I totally get where that's coming from. But let me share with you now what the best science of the modern world now is showing since that time. TM is great. I think it works. I think the evidence supports that strongly. It can help. The key is that the positive results end when the people stop creating the positive results. And it leads us to this very deep spiritual principle that we must become in our lives what we choose to experience in the world. We must become in our lives the calm, the peace, the coherence that we are hoping to see, that we want to see reflected in the world around us. The reason the statistics changed in the TM process is because when the people stopped, when they stopped and got up and walked away, the positive impact of what they had done began to wane. And this is what the quantum physics now is telling us. It's not necessarily about the number. It doesn't necessarily take a certain number of people to create the change. It's more about the quality of the coherence within the individuals that are feeding that quantum field. A relatively few number of people can influence the field. This is where you and I come in. It's not about something that we do in a moment in time. It's about what we be. It's about a way of living. It's about a way of life. It's great to sit down and share our love in a moment of meditation with our brothers and sisters in Russia and Ukraine, because both countries are suffering right now. Both countries. The world is suffering. So it's great to share that love. The key is, what happens when that meditation is over? When you get up from the yoga mat or from the comfy chair and the burning candle and the perfect music and the bells and the bowls and the chimes and the gongs and the incense or whatever it is that you're doing, what is your consciousness? What is your state of mind? Where is your heart? When you leave that meditation, you go to the grocery store, how kindly do you treat the people that you meet, the man or the woman or the boy or the girl at the checkout stand? When you're driving on the freeway to get to the grocery store, do you make it your personal mission to make sure that everyone around you on the road has as safe of an experience as possible? Do you do your very best to make sure that the person coming onto the freeway ramp in front of you gets on there safely, and those that are changing lanes without thinking. I mean, these are just examples in our everyday lives. It's what we become, and this is an opportunity for the world to understand this. And there's so much hurt in the world, and that hurt is unresolved. And unresolved hurt often leads to fear, and that fear leads to anger, and the anger leads to hate. So the hate that we are seeing in the world right now, not just in what's happening in Eastern Europe, but many other places in the world, there are tragedies that are happening in Syria. There are tragedies happening in Somalia. There are tragedies happening in Yemen. There are tragedies happening in many, many places throughout the world that the mainstream media simply will not cover, because they are working to create a narrative of the kind of world we have to get us to think in certain ways. So you have to dig for this. You have to look for the information. When we consider these tragedies and we look at the amount of hurt, unresolved hurt in the world, I'm not surprised that the anger is there. And it's within the context of that anger and that fear and that hate that you and I are being invited, we're being tasked to reach deep inside to the deep truth of the internal technology that we have. We are soft technology, a highly advanced, highly sophisticated technological form of life that regulates, self-regulates through thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, and focus. And we can use those in every moment of our lives to create within ourselves the experience that we want to feed into the field. And that field is what everyone else is drawing from. So we have this opportunity right now. And I know it's difficult. And it may not stop. The idea that the meditation is going to stop violence, I don't think is realistic. What the meditation does is it changes the foundation of the thinking that can lead to violence. So as we feed that field, the goal is for us to feed the field with the coherence and the love, the empathy and the compassion that makes hate obsolete. And as that hate becomes obsolete, we find fewer and fewer opportunities for the kinds of wars that we're seeing right now. So I hope this helps a little bit. Eileen, this was a long answer to your very brief question, and it was preceded by some things I just wanted to share with you all today. So I will be I'll do a lightning round next time, and I'll address as many questions as possible. I wanted to share these things with you today. I hope you found it useful. Thank you for sharing a part of your day in this question and answer, and I look forward to our next.